Alamo alaikum. Welcome back to our deep dive on the insights gathered from the book's True Courtroom Stories, researched by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir. This is the episode 116 Focus, drawn from the book True Courtroom Stories, researched by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir. Today, we are wrestling with, I think, one of the most foundational concepts in any free society, and that's judicial independence. It sounds a bit dry, maybe a bit academic, but what we're really talking about is it's the ultimate defense mechanism. It's that moment when all the power of the state, all the political pressure, all of public opinion comes crashing down on one person.
Right, on a single judge.
Exactly. And that judge has to be able to stand firm, look at the law, and make a ruling completely, totally without fear.
And that's such a precarious position to be in. I mean, you think about it, the judicial branch, it doesn't have an army. It doesn't control the budget.
It has neither the person or the sword, as they say.
Precisely. Its only real power comes from legitimacy, from the trust that people, and just as importantly, the other branches of government place in its decisions. So it's really the ultimate stress test for any democracy.
So that brings us to the big question for today, the one we really have to get into. What protects the protectors?
Yes.
What are the actual structures, the historical ideas, the legal battles that give a judge the strength to rule against a president or a prime minister or the most powerful corporation in the country?
And that is our mission today. We've got a fascinating stack of sources here that really defines this idea of independence of judges.
It looks like our sources break this down into four pillars, really.
They do. They're all interconnected. We're going to start with the core principle, the why of it all. It's called the ratio. Then we'll look at the most common tool the world uses to make it happen, which is security of tenure.
Okay, the why and then the how.
Exactly. And after that, we're going to trace this idea way back, historically, into the Islamic tradition, which had its own way of dealing with this exact problem.
And then we bring it all home to the modern day.
Yeah.
To a specific, very real legal fight, the Al-Jihad trust line in Pakistan. This is where we see these ideas being fought for in the trenches, so to speak.
And it's so important to see that because if any one of these pillars we're talking about starts to crumble, the whole structure of judicial independence is at risk. And that creates immediate risk for everyone in that society.
Right. And our goal today is to really unpack these structures for you. We want you to see why these protections aren't some special privilege for judges.
No.
They're a fundamental right for you, the citizen. Because at the end of the day, when a judge is protected, your rights are protected, your property, your liberty.
That's what it all comes down to.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with that fundamental need, that core reason.
Yeah.
So we start with the philosophical foundation. The ratio. Our source material puts it very simply. Fearless judges preserve free societies. It's a great line. It's powerful. But we need to break that down. What does fearless actually mean for a judge sitting on the bench?
Yeah, that's the key question. It's obviously not just about, physical bravery.
Right.
In this context, fearlessness means a kind of institutional and psychological immunity from pressure, from coercion. A judge has to be free from any influence that could possibly make them deviate from the facts, the evidence, and the law.
And those influences, they can come from anywhere, can't they? It's not always the obvious stuff.
Not at all. We all think of the big one, political pressure. A phone call from the prime minister's office trying to sway a verdict. That's the movie version.
Sure.
But the reality is often much more subtle. Think about career pressure. What if a judge knows that a certain ruling, an inconvenient one, might mean they never get promoted to a higher court?
Or they get transferred, sent to some courthouse in the middle of nowhere as a punishment.
Exactly. Or, and this is a really insidious one, they're kept as an acting judge for years, never fully confirmed, always serving at the pleasure of the executive, who can just decide not to renew their term.
Yeah.
That creates a constant low-level fear.
And there's financial pressure too, I imagine. Threats to your pension, your benefits.
Or even just delaying salaries for the entire judiciary if the government is unhappy with the line of decisions. It's all about creating leverage. The goal of these pressures is to make the judge think about something other than the law.
It's about forcing them to weigh their own self-preservation against their duty.
That is the precise point of failure. The second a judge starts thinking, if I rule this way, it could cost me my job, my promotion, my family's security. Well, at that moment, they're not judging the law anymore.
They're judging their own survival.
And that's the beginning of the end for the rule of law. Because once the public and, the legal community start to see the judiciary as just another political tool of the executive, all trust evaporates. The
Yeah.
separation of powers just vanishes.
Decisions become predictable. You don't look at the law books, you look at the political winds to see how a case will turn out.
You look at who has more power, who has the ear of the president, not who has the better legal argument.
But let me push back on this just a little bit. When we talk about making judges fearless, making them immune, doesn't that risk making them unaccountable?
That is the central tension. It's a great question.
I mean, if they're totally protected, what's the check on a judge who's just bad at their job?
Yeah.
Or lazy? Or, corrupt? There has to be some kind of balance, right?
There does, and that's why the mechanisms we're going to talk about next are so carefully designed. Fearlessness does not mean unaccountability. It's a critical distinction. It means accountability to the law, and only to the law.
I see.
So you're not accountable to the political party that's currently in power. You're accountable to the Constitution through very specific, very rigorous processes. The risk of one bad judge, say, benefiting from these protections is something the system tolerates.
Because the alternative is so much worse.
Because the alternative, a judiciary that is constantly afraid of the executive, is catastrophic for the entire system.
So the fear we're trying to get rid of is the fear of retaliation for a lawful decision, not the fear of consequences for, say, taking a bribe.
Exactly. And let's connect that back to the idea of preserving free societies. The main job of an independent court is to enforce limits on power. The executive, the legislature, they are always, by their very nature, trying to expand their authority.
Especially during a crisis.
Especially then. It's the fearless judge who has to be able to stand up and say, no, that executive order goes too far. You have overstepped your constitutional bounds. If the judge is afraid of the very people they're supposed to be checking,
the check never happens. And unchecked power becomes absolute power.
And this is most important when public opinion is running high. Sometimes the law requires a decision that is deeply unpopular. Maybe it's protecting the rights of a hated minority or upholding an international treaty that people don't like.
A judge worried about their career might just go with the popular decision.
A fearful judge would. But a fearless judge stands on the law because they understand they're not serving today's opinion polls. They're serving the long-term stability of the legal order, which needs to be consistent, not politically convenient.
So it's about principle, not popularity. And the damage from a fearful judiciary, it goes beyond just constitutional crises.
Oh, it cripples the economy. Think about it. Would you invest your money in a country where you know the courts are controlled by the government?
No way.
If you have a contract dispute with a powerful state-connected company, you know you're going to lose, regardless of what the contract says. So foreign investment it dries up because there's no predictability.
So the fearlessness of the judge is what guarantees the predictability of the whole system.
It is. It's the bedrock. And so for you listening, this is the so what. If judges are not fearless, who loses? It's not the powerful people. It's the ordinary citizen whose land is taken, whose rights are violated. If the referee is biased, the game is over before it starts. This ratio is the reason why everything else we're about to discuss is so non-negotiable.
Okay, so if the goal is to create this fearless judge, this impartial arbiter, the world has sort of landed on one main tool to do it.
It has a kind of institutional armor.
Right. And that armor is security of tenure. This is the mechanism that takes that philosophical idea we just discussed and makes it real, makes it practical.
It is the single most important structural safeguard. And security of tenure, when you break it down, it really means two fundamental things. First, a judge is appointed for a long, fixed term, usually until a mandatory retirement age, say 70 or 75.
So it's not a 2-year or 4-year contract that's up for review.
Absolutely not. And second, and this is the really crucial part, they cannot be removed from that position except through an incredibly difficult, transparent, and politically insulated process.
And only for very specific reasons.
Only for proven severe misconduct or, genuine incapacity. Not because someone in power dislikes their rulings.
This is the complete opposite of a political appointee who, as they say, serves at the pleasure of the leader.
Exactly. That phrase, serves at the pleasure, is the definition of a dependent position. My job exists as long as I please you. The moment I displease you, I'm gone. Security of tenure is designed to be the antithesis of that. It builds a wall.
A wall against the executive's most powerful weapon, which is the threat of firing someone, the threat of taking away their livelihood.
It removes that weapon from the table. If a judge makes a ruling against the government, the president can't just pick up the phone and say, "You're fired." They might want to, but the system is designed to make that almost impossible.
Okay, let's get into the weeds on that removal process, because you said it's incredibly difficult. The security is really in those details, isn't it? What makes it so hard to do?
It's designed to be complex and politically painful, to stop it from being used as a weapon. In most stable systems, you can't even start the process without going through an independent body first, like a judicial council made up of other senior judges.
So it's a peer review
A
almost.
peer review, and then it usually has to go to the legislature.
Huh.
And we're not talking about a simple majority vote, we're talking about a supermajority.
Like 2/3 or even 3/4?
Yes, often in both houses of parliament. And that supermajority requirement is the key,
Why is that specific threshold so important?
because it forces broad bipartisan agreement. If you only need 51% to remove a judge, then judicial removals become a partisan political game. Every time a new party takes power, they could just purge the bench of judges appointed by the last government.
It would be chaos.
Total chaos. A supermajority means that even the opposition party has to agree that this judge has done something so terrible that they must be removed. It insulates the judiciary from the normal, back and forth of politics.
And what are the grounds? What counts as severe misconduct? It's not just making a ruling someone disagrees with, right?
Absolutely not. Tenure explicitly protects a judge's legal interpretations, even if they're controversial. The grounds for removal are things like, high crimes, proven bribery, treason, or documented medical incapacity, where a judge is physically or mentally unable to do the job.
So it's a quasi-criminal standard.
It is. The investigation is serious. There's a high burden of proof. The judge has a right to defend themselves. It's a huge deal. The distinction is crystal clear. Ruling against the government is a constitutional duty. Taking a bribe is a removable offense.
So the sheer difficulty of the process,
Yeah.
that's the whole point. It's a feature, not a bug.
It is the entire point.
Yeah.
The process is designed to be so difficult, so politically costly, that it acts as a massive deterrent. A prime minister might be furious about a court decision, but when they realize they'd have to spend months, maybe years, and a huge amount of political capital to even try to remove that judge,
With a high chance of failing.
with a very high chance of failing, they're much more likely to just, grumble and accept the ruling. It changes the entire cost-benefit analysis for the executive. It makes complying with the law the easier option.
And what are the positive effects of this? Beyond just protection from being fired, how does this long-term security affect the quality of the judiciary itself?
It has a huge impact on stability and expertise. If you know you're going to be on the bench for 20 or 30 years, you invest in yourself. You develop deep knowledge in a specific area of law, whether that's complex financial regulation or constitutional theory.
You're in it for the long haul.
You are, and it creates continuity in the law. Judges can build on each other's work over decades, creating a stable, predictable legal framework. That predictability is what allows businesses to plan and citizens to know what their rights are.
A judge with tenure is also thinking about their legacy, not just the next election cycle.
100%. They're not trying to write a popular opinion that will please the current government. They're writing for the law books. They're trying to craft a principled, logical ruling that will be cited by lawyers and judges 50 years from now. Security of tenure is what elevates the judiciary above the daily political fight and allows it to focus solely on the long-term health of the law.
So we've got the modern global standard, security of tenure, but this idea, this core concept that the judge must be shielded from the political ruler, it's not new. It's not a modern Western invention at all.
Not even close. And what's so fascinating is seeing how different cultures across different centuries have all wrestled with the same fundamental problem.
Which is, how do you stop the person with the army from controlling the person with the law book?
That's it in a nutshell. And our sources point to the Islamic tradition as a powerful historical example of this. The principle was clear. Judges protected from dismissal. This wasn't just a good idea for governance, it was woven into the very theological and legal fabric of the state.
Let's talk about the role of the judge in that context. The Qadi. This wasn't just another government official.
No. The Qadi had a unique and profound responsibility. Their job was to apply the Sharia, which was understood as divine law. And the key here is that this divine law was seen as being above everyone, including the ruler.
So the judge's authority didn't come from the caliph or the sultan. It came from a higher source.
Exactly. And that created the imperative for independence. If the Qadi's job is to apply a law that is superior to the ruler, then the ruler cannot be allowed to control the Qadi.
Because if the caliph could just fire a judge for a ruling he didn't like,
It would mean that the caliph's political will was more powerful than the divine law itself. And that would undermine the ruler's own legitimacy, which is often based on the idea that they were the upholder of the Sharia.
Wow. So that creates a really powerful sort of theological firewall against political interference.
It does. It's a moral and a structural check. The Qadi was expected to be impartial, even if it meant ruling against the Caliph's own family, or his top generals, or his financial interests.
Okay, so that's the theory. How did it work in practice? How did they actually protect the judges, especially when you're talking about rulers who were, in many other ways, absolute monarchs?
Well, it started with the appointment. Great care was taken to select Qadis who were known for their deep legal knowledge, their piety, and their personal integrity. And crucially, once appointed, they were often appointed for life.
For life. So that's the historical version of tenure until retirement age.
It is, or until they became too ill to perform their duties. And the process for removal was extremely limited. It mirrored the modern standards we just talked about.
So you couldn't be removed for an unpopular ruling.
Never. You could only be removed for, say, a documented gross misapplication of the law, or for severe moral failings, things like corruption or a lifestyle that was seen as immoral, things that would disqualify you in the eyes of the community.
But who made that call? Who decided if a judge's actions met that high bar? If the Aleph appointed them, couldn't he just declare that the judge was immoral and fire him?
This is where the insulation comes in. This is the clever part. The ruler couldn't just do it unilaterally. The decision to remove a Qadi almost always required the consultation, and often the agreement, of the ulema.
The community of religious scholars and legal experts.
Yes. They were the custodians of the law. They were the experts. So they acted as a kind of peer review council. They would have to agree that, yes, this judge's legal error was so profound or his moral failing so great that he had to be removed. It couldn't just be a political whim.
That is an amazing parallel to a modern judicial council. The decision-making power rests not with the executive, but with the body of experts who actually understand the law.
It's the same structural logic. You put the power of review in the hands of peers who can judge the person based on professional standards, not political loyalty.
But this history really validates the modern idea of tenure, doesn't it? It shows that this isn't some abstract theory. It's a practical solution to a timeless problem.
A completely timeless problem. The struggle to create a government that is powerful enough to rule, but not so powerful that it can rule without any limits.
And what this tells us is that whether your ultimate source of law is a written constitution or a body of divine law, that law is only as strong as the person who applies it.
And that person can only be strong if they are protected. The core insight is the same across centuries and across cultures. The arbiter of justice cannot be beholden to the powerful.
Okay, so we've gone from the big idea, the why, to the global mechanism, and then back to the historical roots. Now we're going to get very specific and very modern.
Now we get into the trenches.
Yes, we're moving to a critical legal battlefield, the Al-Jihad Trust Line in Pakistan. This is where the theory hits the road. This is where we see a judiciary having to actively fight for and carve out its own independence against the executive. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It does, because protections on paper mean nothing if they can't be enforced. And the Al-Jihad Trust Line is a story of the judiciary enforcing its own independence.
So before we dive into the case itself, can you explain what lawyers mean when they talk about a line of cases? That's a specific legal term, right?
It is. A line means a whole series of judgments over years or even decades that all build on one original landmark decision. It's like a foundational ruling that is so important that it keeps getting tested and challenged, and so the courts have to keep reaffirming it and refining it in later cases.
So the fact that it's a line tells you that this wasn't a one-and-done fight. This was a sustained battle.
A sustained defense of a core principle. The existence of the line shows just how contested and how vital this issue of judicial independence was.
Okay, so let's get to that landmark case, the Al-Jihad Trust case from 1996. What was the fight about? What was the core issue that the Supreme Court of Pakistan was trying to solve?
At its heart, the case was about the appointment process for judges to the high courts and the Supreme Court. The Constitution had a process, but the way it was being used was, well, it was a problem.
How so?
The Constitution said that the president must consult with the Chief Justice when appointing judges. For a long time, the executive branch had basically interpreted consultation to mean, we'll ask your opinion, but we can completely ignore it.
So it was just a formality.
It was being treated as a formality. This gave the executive, the president, and the prime minister huge influence over who became a judge. It opened the door to political appointments, to patronage, to rewarding loyalists with positions on the bench.
And if the executive controls who gets in the door?
Then they effectively control the entire judiciary. They can install judges who are favorable to them, and everyone already on the bench knows that their future, their promotions, their confirmations depend on staying in the good graces of the government. It's a direct attack on the security of tenure for everyone.
So the case was about plugging that hole, about securing the entry point to protect the entire institution.
That's it, exactly. And the Supreme Court, in this really monumental decision in '96, completely changed the game. They redefined what consultation meant.
How did they do that? What was the legal reasoning?
They said that in this specific constitutional context, consultation couldn't just be a polite chat, it had to be effective consultation. They ruled that the recommendations coming from the Chief Justice, who is, after all, the person best equipped to judge legal merit, had to be given primacy.
Primacy. So the Chief Justice's opinion carried more weight.
Much more. The court essentially ruled that the executive had to, for all practical purposes, defer to the Chief Justice's recommendations on appointments. If the Chief Justice said a candidate was qualified and suitable, that recommendation was binding, unless the executive had very strong, compelling reasons to reject it.
That is a massive power shift.
It's a constitutional earthquake. It takes the power to shape the judiciary away from the politicians and places it firmly in the hands of the judiciary itself. It's a muscular assertion of the separation of powers.
And you can see how this directly reinforces the idea of the fearless judge we talked about at the beginning.
Oh, directly. It institutionalizes it. It puts concrete legal rules around it. If judges are appointed based on merit, in a process led by their own senior peers, they start their careers with a degree of independence. They don't owe their jobs to a political party.
So they have less to fear from the executive branch from day one.
Far less. And it protects the tenure of existing judges. It makes it much harder for the government to, say, refuse to confirm an acting judge just because they made a few rulings the government didn't like. The entire system becomes more secure.
And the fact that this became a line of cases with more rulings after 1996, what does that tell us? Did the executive just roll over and accept this new reality?
Of course not. The executive branch never gives up power easily. The subsequent cases in the line show that the government kept trying to find ways around the 1996 ruling to claw back that power over appointment.
And the Supreme Court had to keep pushing back.
They had to keep defending that line in the sand. And that's the big takeaway. Judicial independence isn't something that's won once and then it's safe forever. It's a state of constant active defense. The Al-Jihad trust line is a perfect modern illustration of the judiciary fighting for and institutionalizing its own security.
So independence isn't a gift from the government. It's a right that the judiciary itself has to be strong enough to claim and to defend.
Through sophisticated, courageous constitutional interpretation. Because they knew that if the appointment process was compromised, everything else, tenure, fearlessness, the rule of law itself, would eventually fall apart. Hashtag OTRO. Synthesis and final thought.
What a journey. This has been a really comprehensive look at the deep architecture of justice. We started with that foundational principle, the ratio.
That fearless judges are essential to preserve free societies.
Exactly. And we defined what that fearlessness really means. It's about immunity from political and career pressure.
Then we looked at the key global tool to achieve that, security of tenure. And we saw that the difficulty of removing a judge is actually the most important part of the design. It's a feature, not a bug.
Right. And then we saw that this is not a new idea at all. We traced it back to the Islamic tradition, where the Qadi was protected from the Caliph because the law itself was seen as supreme.
With the ulema, the scholars, acting as that crucial peer review buffer.
And then finally, we saw this system under stress in the modern era with the Al-Jihad trust line in Pakistan. A real-world example of the judiciary actively defending its own independence by taking control of the appointment process.
It's a fantastic illustration of all the principles in action.
So these four pillars, the reason for it, the mechanism, the historical precedent, and the active legal defense, they all work together. They're all aiming at one simple goal.
That when you, the citizen, have your day in court, the outcome is decided by the law and the facts, period. Not by who has more power or political connections.
The security of the judge is, at the end of the day, the security of the citizen. So what does this all mean then, as we look forward?
I think it means we have to stay vigilant. I mean, everything we've talked about today has focused on the traditional threats to a judge's independence.
You mean threats from the government, from the executive branch, Formal dismissal, political pressure, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Threats to their job security. But in the 21st century, I think there's a new and maybe even more insidious kind of threat emerging that our traditional constitutional defenses aren't really built to handle.
You're talking about something outside of government.
I am. I'm talking about the power of social media, of misinformation, of targeted online character assassination campaigns.
Ah,
Think about it. A judge makes an unpopular but legally correct ruling in a highly polarized case. Within minutes, they can be facing a tidal wave of online hate, threats, and disinformation designed to destroy their reputation and terrorize them personally.
it's a new kind of pressure, a new kind of fear. It might not get you fired.
But it can destroy your peace of mind, your family's safety, your public standing. It can exert a chilling effect that is just as powerful as a threat from the president's office.
That's a really profound point.
So the provocative thought I'd want to leave everyone with is this. Does our concept of security of tenure need to evolve? Do we need to start thinking about how to protect judges, not just from the state, but from these new non-governmental forms of psychological warfare?
How do we ensure their fearlessness remains absolute when the threat isn't a formal dismissal, but a digital mob?
That is the next great challenge, I think, for every legal system in the world. And we don't have the answer to it yet.
A challenging thought indeed. How do we protect the protectors from the mob when we've spent centuries learning how to protect them from the monarch? Thank you for joining us as we unpack these essential pillars of judicial independence.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll see you next time.